Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute, almost engineering level precision, right?
Yeah, completely.
Like you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the screen, and the doctor just points to it with a pen and says, there it is. That's the problem.
Right. It's binary. It's a system we completely understand.
Exactly. It's broken or it's not broken. It's clean. It's objective.
And honestly, that is deeply comforting for us. Human beings love things to be visible. We like reality to be categorized and, clearly bounded.
Yeah, but then you step into the world of inner transformation. Yeah. Specifically, what we are doing today, which is looking at the landscape of deep, radical spiritual awakening. And suddenly that x-ray machine is it's completely useless.
Yeah.
We are looking at a map of human experience that is profoundly murky, contradictory, and entirely subjective.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. But it's also where the most profound human truths seem to live, and that's exactly where we're heading today.
Right. So welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a huge stack of sources, primarily pulling from Sufi mysticism. We've got a lot of classical poetry from the Essential Rumi, translated by Coleman Barks, some brilliant scholarly analysis from Anne-Marie Schimmel's Rumi's World, and classical commentaries from Sufism and Ma'rifa, and they all completely redefine a word we use every single day: the heart.
And right out of the gate, we really need the listener to completely discard the way we usually use that word.
Yes, please.
We're not talking about the biological pump in your chest moving blood. And we're definitely not talking about the hallmark Valentine's Day metaphor for, fluffy romance and fleeting emotions.
Not even close. The texts we are examining today, alongside the comparative traditions we'll weave in, they present a map of the heart that is radical, violent, and deeply intoxicating.
Yeah, in these traditions, the heart is not a safe, cozy place. It's a crucible.
Our mission today is to embark on this massive comparative exploration for you, the listener. We are investigating the lived experience, what scholars call the phenomenology of the awakened heart. We want to know what this actually feels like to experience firsthand.
Right, looking at the heart as a spiritual organ of perception.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And while our primary lens is the Sufi tradition, we're going to follow these threads outward. We'll be pulling in Christian mystics like Meister Eckhart, the Desert Fathers, and even elements of Hindu Bhakti traditions to see if there is a universal human experience of inner transformation that just completely breaks rational theology.
That's the key right there. We're looking for the experiential patterns that transcend religious dogma. What does a human being actually go through when their core identity is dismantled and replaced by what these traditions call divine love?
Okay, let's just jump right into the deep end. Because in these traditions, the heart, which is dil in Persian or qalb in Arabic, is positioned as something completely mind-bending. The texts call it the astrolabe of love.
Which is a beautiful image.
It really is. It's described as a mirror, a house, the throne of God, and sometimes a terrifying absolute emptiness.
And the mechanism here is fascinating, especially when you look at the sheer duality of how the heart is described. In Anne-Marie Schimmel's analysis, she points out that Rumi describes the heart with a dizzying, almost comical difference in scale.
I noticed that. It goes back and forth so drastically.
Right. On the one hand, he calls it a timid little darling, or my absolute favorite, he compares it to a shivering fish in a frying pan.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's this incredibly fragile, vulnerable vessel. He calls it the glass bottle inhabited by the beloved fairy.
A shivering fish in a frying pan. That is such a visceral, almost uncomfortable image of vulnerability. It implies a kind of suffering, or at least being subjected to an intense heat you just can't control.
Exactly. You are at the mercy of the heat. And interestingly, you see the exact same fragile intimacy in medieval Christian writings, where they called the heart the dulcis hospes animae, meaning the sweet guest of the soul. It's something delicate that must be protected. But then in the very next breath, this exact same organ is described as a cosmic force. Rumi says the heart can squeeze the heavens like a kerchief.
Which is an insane pivot. from a shivering fish to a hand that can crumple at the universe.
It really is. The sources refer to the heart as the Masjid al-Aqsa, the farthest mosque, and as the Kaaba, the literal house of God. The central paradox here is that the heart is the ultimate container of the infinite, somehow placed inside the finite, limited human chest.
See, I'm struggling with this part a bit. How can something be an organ of perception if it's also the thing containing the universe? The text from Sufism and Ma'rifa lays down what looks like a foundational rule for this. Let me grab the quote. It says, "The sustenance of the heart is attainment of love and experiential knowledge of Allah. Innate to the heart is to find the one who possesses disposal over it and to incline towards and love him unreservedly."
Yes.
So they are claiming the heart is actually designed mechanically to consume a very specific type of knowledge, which they call Ma'rifa.
Right. And this is where we have to establish a crucial psychological boundary for the rest of our discussion. We must carefully distinguish between the intellect and the heart. In the modern post-Enlightenment world, we basically equate the brain, the intellect, and rational thought with the absolute pinnacle of human perception.
Right. If you can't measure it or logic your way into it, it's not real.
Exactly. But in these contemplative traditions, the intellect is viewed as inherently limited. I mean, it is useful, even indispensable for a time, to navigate the physical world. You need your intellect to build a bridge, to do your taxes, to just survive.
Sure.
But it is fundamentally unable to enter the secret chamber of love. Schimmel notes that the intellect operates by dividing and categorizing it. It separates the observer from the observed. Therefore, it just cannot grasp unconditioned, unified reality.
Let me see if I can map this onto something I know. It sounds like the intellect is the map, but the heart is the actual territory.
Oh, I like that.
Like, you can read a topographical map of Mount Everest, you can memorize the elevation, the weather patterns, the routes. That's the intellect. But you can't use that piece of paper to actually feel the freezing air in your lungs or the exhaustion in your legs. The heart is the organ that actually climbs the mountain and experiences the cold.
That is a brilliant analogy. The intellect gives you the data about the thing, but the heart gives you the participation in the thing. Rumi illustrates this epistemological limitation beautifully with a story that actually originates in ancient Indian traditions, but he adapts it for Sufism. It's the famous story of the blind men and the elephant.
I know this one, but tell it the way the text presented, because it really gets to the core of this whole perception issue.
Okay, so an elephant is brought into a dark room in a city of blind men. Because they cannot see, they use their limited senses, which represents the intellect, to try and understand this massive reality. One man feels the trunk and declares, "This reality is like a water pipe." Another feels the ear and says, "No, reality is like a fan." Another feels the leg and insists reality is a pillar.
And they are all technically correct based on their localized data.
Yes.
But they are entirely missing the truth of the whole creature.
Precisely. They are trapped in their fragmented data. But Rumi says if each of them held a candle, and if they brought that light into the room, the differences would disappear. They would see the whole elephant.
Oh, wow.
The awakened heart is that candle. It is the supreme organ of spiritual perception that synthesizes the fragmented, categorized data of the intellect into a unified vision.
Okay, so if the heart is this cosmic astrolabe, this ultimate candle, and Sufism and Ma'rifa says it is innately designed to incline toward the divine. Here's my pushback.
Sure, go for it.
Why are we all walking around feeling so disconnected? I mean, if we're built for this, why isn't everyone just vibrating with divine love at the grocery store? Why does it feel so incredibly rare?
Well, if human psychology abhors a vacuum, the human ego actively despises the divine light. If we look at the lived experience described in these texts, the answer to your question lies in what actively blocks the heart. Sufism and Ma'rifa is brutally clear on this. The destruction of the heart is caused by what they call heedlessness.
Heedlessness.
Yeah. It is the inclination to everything other than the divine. It's plunging into the deep waters of worldly concern by obeying the vain desires of something called the nafs.
The nafs. Now, this is a term we really need to unpack because it comes up constantly in the sources. In English translations, it's usually rendered as the animal soul, the desire body, right?
It is, but we have to be very careful not to map our Western puritanical baggage onto it. Do not view the nafs merely as sin in a moralistic, finger-wagging sense.
Right, it's not just breaking rules.
No, the nafs are frantic, fragmented energies. They are the psychological drives that keep us constantly moving, acquiring, defending, and stopping nowhere. They are the churn of worldly attachments, the ego's constant need to affirm its own separate existence.
So it's not just, I want to eat an entire cake, it's, I need people to respect my job title, or I need to win this argument on the internet to prove I exist.
Exactly. It's the survival drive metastasized into psychological identity. And there is a brilliant poem in the Coleman Barks translation called Jesus on the Lean Donkey that perfectly illustrates how the naf interact with the intellect.
Walk me through that one.
So in Islamic mysticism, Jesus is highly revered and often represents the strong, pure, rational spirit, the inner light of divine revelation. And in this poem, Jesus is riding a lean donkey. The donkey represents the animal soul, the nafs. Rumi says this image is an emblem of the proper internal hierarchy.
Meaning the spirit is in charge.
Exactly. The rational, spirit-guided intellect should be sitting on top of and controlling the animal soul. The donkey is useful, right? It carries you through the physical world. You need it.
But you shouldn't let the donkey steer.
Right. But here's where Rumi issues a terrifying psychological warning. He says that if the spirit becomes weak-like, if you starve your higher spiritual perception, then the worn-out donkey grows to a dragon.
Whoa, that escalates quickly.
Yeah.
From a stubborn beast of burden to a mythical apex predator.
It's a profound psychological truth. Base desires don't just remain passive when they take control. If the intellect becomes subservient to the ego, it doesn't just make you a little greedy or a little selfish. The intellect actively weaponizes those desires.
Oh, that makes sense. The brain starts justifying the ego.
Exactly. The ego mutates into a dragon that consumes the person and everything around them. The texts use the metaphor of rust on the mirror of the soul to describe this process.
The rust metaphor is fascinating.
Yeah.
Because it implies the base layer is perfect.
Yes. The heart is, by its very nature, a flawless mirror meant to reflect the divine. But the nafs, this constant heedlessness, this dragon energy, deposits layer upon layer of rust. Every time we choose the fragment over the whole, every time we obsess over our separate identity, another layer of rust forms until the reflection is completely obscured.
I get the rust, and I get the dragon. But as I was reading through the sources, Rumi takes this idea of what blocks us to an extreme that I found genuinely disturbing.
Uh-oh. Which part?
There's a section where he claims that our literal mother and father are our worst enemies. He writes, "The mother and father are your attachment to beliefs and bloodedness and desires and comforting habits. Don't listen to them. They seem to protect, but imprison." I mean, I have to stop here. Calling your literal parents your worst enemies sounds incredibly toxic. How does Shimel, or the Sufi tradition generally, defend alienating people from their families?
It's an intensely radical statement, and you are totally right to be shocked by it. But we have to look past literal biological parentage to understand the mechanism he is describing here. He is not telling you to hate the people who raised you. He's talking about the psychological parents of your ego.
So the structures that keep us safe.
Yes. The family unit, the tribe, our inherited cultural beliefs, these are the psychological wounds that nurture our egoic identity. They provide us with a narrative of who we are, where we belong, and what is safe. And they do protect us, just like a womb protects an embryo. But Rumi is saying that eventually the womb becomes a tomb.
A tomb. Wow.
If you stay in the safety of your inherited beliefs, if you refuse to question the narrative your parents handed you, your spiritual perception will never be born.
Okay, I see. It's like the modern concept of the comfort zone, but elevated to a spiritual life or death scenario. He's essentially saying that safety, habit, and the warm protection of our social structures are a spiritual poison if they prevent us from stepping into the terrifying vulnerability of divine realization.
Exactly. And to explain this dynamic, Rumi uses one of the most stunning and famous metaphors in the entire mystical canon. It's the conversation with an embryo.
Yes. Let's spend some time on this because it blew my mind when I read it.
It's so good. So Rumi asks us to imagine having a conversation with an embryo inside the womb. The embryo's entire universe is dark, cramped, and its nourishment comes passively through the blood. You, as a fully realized human, lean in and whisper to this embryo, "The world outside is vast and intricate. There are wheat fields and mountain passes and orchards in bloom. At night there are millions of galaxies, and in sunlight the beauty of friends dancing at a wedding."
And you ask the embryo, "Why do you stay cooped up in the dark with your eyes closed?"
And what is the embryo's response?
The embryo basically calls you crazy. It says, "There is no other world. I only know what I've experienced. My reality is this dark, warm fluid. You must be hallucinating."
And that, Rumi says, is the exact posture of the ego-bound human being. The embryo's denial is identical to our denial of the spiritual reality. We look at the mystics, we hear them talking about this vast, intoxicating love and union, and we say, "You're hallucinating. The only reality is my job, my bank account, my physical body, and my social status."
So the takeaway here is deeply confrontational for the listener. The texts are asking you, what is your womb right now? What are the comforting habits, the literal and metaphorical blood teas that are nourishing you, keeping you feeling safe, but simultaneously keeping you in the dark?
It is the ultimate confrontation. The contemplative traditions, and not just Sufism, but the Desert Fathers retreating into the Egyptian sands, or the Hindu sannyasins leaving their families, they universally agree that as long as you refuse to leave the womb of your constructed social identity, your heart cannot awaken to the galaxies outside. You have to be born.
But birth is violent. An embryo doesn't just float out of the womb on a cloud. It is squeezed, crushed, and pushed out into a freezing, blindingly bright world. If comforting habits are the womb keeping us trapped, how do we break out? The sources are very clear that the mechanics of purification are not passive.
They are brutally active. The transition from the womb to the outside world requires what Jalal and Rumi describe as a radical disassembling of what we want and who we think we are.
This brings us to a fascinating phase in the map: the pickaxe and the mirror. Rumi has an entire section dedicated to the metaphor of the pickaxe. He argues that our identity is not a real thing. It's a constructed building made of everything we identify with: our opinions, our traumas, our achievements. And he says this structure must be torn down, completely demolished.
Right, flattened.
He writes, "The pickaxe dismantles the illusory personality and finds two glints in the dirt, a treasure within our lives unconnected to experience."
The mechanism of the pickaxe is fierce attention work. It is the application of ascetic discipline.
But what does that actually look like in real life? When we say ascetic discipline, people usually think of wearing hair shirts or starving in a cave. How does a pickaxe hit the ego today?
Well, think about what happens when you deny your ego something it desperately wants. Say you decide to undertake a strict fast, or you commit to sitting in silent meditation at 4 a.m. every day. When your alarm goes off, your ego screams, your body rebels. When you refuse to check your phone for external validation, your psychological identity throws a tantrum.
Oh, I feel that. The anxiety of being disconnected.
That anxiety, that screaming, is the sound of the pickaxe hitting the concrete of your identity. By observing the tantrum instead of giving into it, you are separating you from the ego. You are chipping away the illusion that you are your desires. It requires brutal honesty with oneself. Rumi writes, "Take an axe to the prison wall. Escape."
Yeah. I have to say, the violence of these metaphors really stands out to me. We're talking about pickaxes, tearing down buildings, mutating dragons, striking with keen blades. It sounds less like a peaceful mindfulness retreat in California and more like an active demolition site. What is the role of suffering in this phase? Because modern spirituality often tries to bypass the pain entirely.
And that is the great trap of modern, commodified spirituality. The idea that awakening is just a series of pleasant, relaxing states.
Like spa music and incense.
Exactly. In this mystical framework, suffering is the inevitable friction of the ego being dismantled. It hurts to have your illusions stripped away. It's terrifying to realize that the you've spent decades building is a fiction. The pain is the breaking of the shell.
But it's not just violent demolition. Alongside the pickaxe, the texts offer a second, more subtle, but equally grueling mechanical metaphor, polishing the mirror.
Yes. And Schimmel unpacks this concept with a famous story that Rumi adapted, a parable about Chinese and Greek artists. It perfectly illustrates the difference between acquiring knowledge and uncovering the heart.
Let's tell the story, because it completely reframed how I think about self-improvement.
The story goes that a great king wanted to settle a debate over who were the better artists, the Chinese or the Greeks. So he gave them two massive rooms facing each other, separated by a curtain. The Chinese artists asked for 100 different colors, expensive pigments, and gold leaf. Every day they spent their time painting a magnificent, incredibly intricate fresco on their wall.
Adding more and more detail.
Exactly, building a masterpiece. The Greek artists, on the other hand, asked for no colors at all. They brought no paint. They simply took to their wall, which was made of raw marble, and they began to polish it. Day and night, with incredible, grueling, ascetic discipline, they just polished the stone.
And eventually the king comes to judge. The Chinese artists reveal their wall, and it is breathtaking. A gorgeous, complex painting.
It is stunning. But then the Greeks draw back the curtain on their side of the room. And because they had polished the marble to such an absolute, flawless perfection, the entire Chinese painting was reflected in their wall. But because the marble was pure, the reflection was actually more beautiful, more radiant, and more luminous than the original painting itself.
So the takeaway here is completely countercultural. If we map this onto our lives, the modern self-help industry, even the modern religious industry, operates like the Chinese artists. We are constantly trying to add more habits, learn more skills, acquire more virtues to paint a better, shinier version of ourselves on the wall.
Yes, acquiring spiritual wealth.
But Rumi is saying the tree mystic is the Greek artist. You stop adding. You stop trying to paint a beautiful picture of your ego. The theological implication here is staggering. You are already inherently divine. The heart is inherently a mirror that reflects the divine. You don't need to acquire God, you just need to chip away the rust.
The work is subtraction, not addition. If you remove what is not God, the heart naturally, effortlessly reflects God. And the Sufis do this daily, momentarily, with something called the broom of La.
La meaning no, right, from the Islamic profession of faith.
Yes, La ilaha illallah, there is no deity save God. Schimmel explains that in the mystical practice of dhikr, or remembrance, this law is not just a theological statement, it is used as a psychological broom or a sword. The mystic uses law to sweep the house of the heart clean of every idol, every attachment, every anxiety, every single thing that is not the beloved.
So say no to the desire for wealth.
Yeah.
No to the fear of death. No to the need to be right.
Precisely. You sweep it all out so the beloved has an empty house to reside in. There is a beautiful illustrative story in the text that captures the ultimate goal of this polishing and sweeping. It's about a childhood friend who comes to visit the prophet Joseph.
Right, Joseph, who is now incredibly wealthy, powerful, and renowned for his almost blinding physical and spiritual beauty.
So this old friend travels a great distance to see him. When they finally reunite, Joseph asks him, "What gift have you brought me?" And the friend is suddenly struck by the absurdity of his situation. He realizes you cannot bring a gift of wealth to someone who owns the entire treasury of Egypt. You cannot bring wheat to the master of the grinding stone. He says, "You have all seeds in your barn. You even already have my love and my soul, so I can't even give you those."
So what does he give him?
He says, "I've brought you a mirror. Look at yourself and remember me." The text then asks a profound philosophical question. What is the mirror of being? And the answer is non-being.
That gave me chills when I read it. The only appropriate gift to bring to the ultimate reality, to God, who already possesses everything in existence, is your own non-existence, your own emptiness.
It is the ultimate act of spiritual courtesy. You cannot bring God your achievements, your theology, or your good deeds. You can only bring him a polished mirror, wiped clean of your ego, so he can look at himself through you.
Which brings us perfectly to the next stage of our map. If emptying yourself is the goal, what happens when that vacuum is actually created? because human psychology abhors a vacuum. It feels like something has to rush in to fill it.
And that takes us into the phenomenology of emptiness and silence. When the pickaxe has demolished the building, when the broom of law has swept the floor, the spiritual realm enters a terrifying yet beautiful state. Rumi writes, "Praise to the emptiness that blanks out existence."
I think my favorite metaphor in the entire Essential Rumi collection, and arguably his most famous, is the reed flute, or the ney. He essentially bases his whole theory of human longing and language on it. The very opening lines of his masterwork, the Masnavi, are, "Listen to the reed and the tale it tells, how it sings of separation. Since I was cut from the reed bed, I have made this crying sound."
It is a profound, incredibly elegant psychological structure. If you look at a flute, it can only make music because it has been violently cut from its root in the earth, hollowed out, and pierced with holes.
So the hollowing out is the pickaxe.
Yes. Language, art, music, and spiritual resonance are only possible because we are empty and because we are acutely aware of our separation from the source. The crying of the flute, the beautiful music it makes, is actually its agony. It is the longing to return to the reed bed.
Rumi asks a brilliant question about this. He says, what is there to praise in a craftsman's skill? It's not the physical wood. It's the bare cylinder, the intricate human form with its 9 holes, fashioned to be a resonator for the invisible flute player. He says, let that musician finish this poem.
If we pull back and look at the bigger picture of comparative mysticism, we see this exact dynamic everywhere. In Christian theology, it is called kenosis, which means self-emptying. St. Paul talks about Christ emptying himself to become human. The fear of emptiness, which plagues modern people who constantly need podcast present company excluded, hopefully music, or scrolling to fill the silence, is ultimately the fear of changing. We are terrified of being nothing.
It's the fear of the void. We spend our entire lives trying to be somebody. We accumulate titles. I'm a doctor, I am a mother, I'm a podcaster, I'm a homeowner. We fill our lives with noise and opinions to prove we exist. And Rumi is essentially looking at us and saying, stop trying to be the music. You're terrible at being the music. Start trying to be the hollow flute. Let the universe blow through you.
Exactly, because emptiness is not a dead, nihilistic void. It is the prerequisite for divine architecture. Rumi has a great line where he says, "A builder looks for the rotten hole where the roof caved in. Workers rush towards some hint of emptiness, which they then start to fill. God, the ultimate builder, is looking for the broken heart. He is looking for the empty space."
And as you mentioned earlier, this isn't just a Sufi concept. Schimmel's text draws a direct, fascinating parallel to the 13th century German Christian mystic Meister Eckhart.
Yes, Eckhart is a giant in Western mysticism, and his language mirrors Rumi's almost exactly, despite them coming from entirely different theological worlds. Eckhart spoke of the soul needing to enter the desert of the Godhead, a state of absolute barren emptiness where the soul knows nothing, wills nothing, and has nothing.
Which sounds terrifying.
To the ego, it is death. Schimmel compares Eckhart's desert to the Sufi concept of Adam, or not being. Both of these massive traditions locate the birthplace of the divine strictly within the completely emptied human soul. Eckhart argued that God must pour himself into an empty vessel. It is his nature. But the spirit is born in the soul only when the individual willingly takes upon themselves the crushing burden of this vast nothingness.
Which explains why Rumi so often signed his poems not with his own name, but with the word Khamush, which translates to silence. 500 odes end with this signature.
It's the ultimate realization of the hollow flute. The poem is authored by the emptiness, by the breath of the invisible player, not by the ego of a man named Jalaluddin Rumi.
But here is where the journey takes a wild, almost dangerous turn. Because if you actually manage to empty yourself, if you survive the pickaxe and become the hollow flute, the human nervous system isn't built to seamlessly handle the infinite blowing through it. When that vacuum is created and the divine rushes in, the reaction isn't a calm, stoic, Zen-like peace. It is absolute chaos.
It is intoxication. It is madness.
Which brings us to the phase of holy madness. Fire, wine, and the tavern. The imagery in the texts completely flips here. We go from silence and ascetic discipline to what looks like a frat party at the end of the universe.
That's a good way to put it. The sources use the metaphor of the tavern constantly. It represents a kind of glorious hell. It is a place outside the boundaries of polite Orthodox religion where human beings enjoy, suffer, and push off from in their search for truth. It's where the heart is laid completely open, stripped of all pious disguises.
And the currency of this tavern is wine. But again, we have to strip away our literal definitions. We aren't talking about a Pinot Noir. Rumi says, the wine we really drink is our own blood. Our bodies ferment in these barrels. We give everything for a glass of this. We give our minds for a sip.
The imagery of wine and drunkenness is perhaps the most universal mystical symbol for the erasure of self-consciousness. You see it in Sufism. You see it in the Song of Solomon in the Hebrew Bible. You see it in the ecstatic poetry of the Hindu bhakti saints like Mirabai. God provides a dark wine so potent that drinking it makes the mystic leave the two worlds entirely. It bypasses the intellect completely.
There's a hilarious and profound line in the text where Rumi says, Jesus was lost in his love for God. His donkey was drunk with barley.
Yes. Returning to the Jesus and the donkey metaphor, meaning the rational spirit is completely intoxicated by the divine, while the physical body, the donkey, is perfectly satisfied with mundane sustenance. The two parts of the human are functioning, but the spirit is drunk.
But this drunkenness makes you a menace to polite society. Rumi says, drunks fear the police. There's this inherent ancient conflict between the ecstatic lover of God and the rigid, rational structures of Orthodox religion.
Always. The fearful ascetic, the Orthodox theologian, runs on foot along the surface of things. They mumble about necessity, free will, dogma, and rules. But the lovers, the drunks, move like lightning and wind. They are unpredictable.
The lived experience of this kind of love completely breaks rational theology. Schimmel highlights the imagery of fire here. Love is described as an oven. It is a tanner used to warm those frozen in the material world. It is the fire beneath the crucible that melts base metals to transform them into gold.
And this fire operates on a logic that is baffling to the intellect. Let's look at the story of the baker in the text. It perfectly illustrates the paradox of ecstatic love and how the divine interacts with the lover.
I love this story. Explain the mechanics of this because it deals with a very common human frustration, which is unanswered prayer.
Right. So the story goes that two people come into a bakery looking for bread. One is a decrepit, unpleasant, dirty old man. The other is a beautiful, handsome young man. The baker takes one look at the old man, immediately grabs a loaf of bread and shoves it into his hands to get rid of him.
Like, take it and leave.
Exactly. But to the handsome young man, the baker says, sit down, wait a while. The fresh bread is still baking. It will take some time.
He essentially ignores his request for bread. Don't leave. The Hava is coming.
Yes, he deliberately delays giving the young man what he wants because he enjoys looking at him. He wants to keep him around in the shop. The theological point Rumi is making here is profound. God sometimes defers his generosity to those he loves most. Why? Because he loves the sound of their passionate, torn open cry. He drags them by the hair into his presence through their need. If he satisfied them immediately, they would take their bread and wander off back to their idle amusements. The withholding is the mechanism of intimacy.
It's a controlled burn. That's the modern analogy I kept coming back to. The text described these lovers throwing off their clothes because the internal heat of this spiritual wine is so intense. Schimmel quotes a historical account. It says, each one feels so hot that his coat seems too tight, and he takes off his cap and opens his belt. This isn't sitting quietly in a pew with a hymnal. The rules are gone. The boundaries of polite religion are completely decimated by this fire.
Which brings up a very real psychological and sociological danger: hypocrisy. Because this state of holy madness is so elevated and romanticized in these traditions, it inevitably attracts fakes. It attracts people who want the aesthetic of the drunken rebel saint without having undergone the agony of the pickaxe.
Right. It's the guy wearing the tie-dye shirt at the ayahuasca retreat, claiming he's enlightened, but he hasn't actually done any moral or psychological work. He's just using crazy wisdom as an excuse for bad behavior.
Exactly, and Rumi has zero patience for this. The tradition is very strict about distinguishing between true ecstatic madness and ego-driven chaos. There's a story of a hypocrite who claims to be a high mystic adept. He's drinking ordinary buttermilk, but shouting out into the street, "Leave me alone in my bewilderment. I am Junaid. I am Bistami," referencing the great historical saints.
So how does the tradition expose someone like that?
The texts say it is as when some fellow claims to be a master tailor, but when the king throws down a piece of priceless satin and says, "Make me a vest," he has no idea what to do with the scissors. True mystical intoxication is grounded in absolute human honesty and competence in the spiritual disciplines. Spiritual sloth and spiritual greed cannot survive the actual fire of love. The fire burns away the fake.
Okay, so what happens to the genuine lover who stays in the fire? The one who actually drinks the wine of their own blood? Where does this all lead? Wow. You can't just stay in a state of chaotic madness forever.
It leads to the final destination, which is the most controversial and profound concept in all of mysticism. It is the utter, catastrophic destruction of the boundary between the lover and the beloved. It leads to spiritual death and annihilation. In Sufi terminology, this is called fana.
Die before you die. Rumi explicitly challenges his listeners to do this. He says, "Quietness is the surest sign that you've died. Your old life was a frantic running from silence."
Fana literally means annihilation or passing away. It is the complete extinction of the egoic self, but it is immediately followed by a state called baka, which means remaining or abiding in God. To understand the sheer radicalness of this state, we have to look at the historical declarations of the classical mystics, known as shatyat, or ecstatic utterances.
This is where my jaw hit the floor reading the sources, because these guys are saying things that in any traditional religious context would get you excommunicated instantly. We have Mansur al-Halash, a famous 10th century mystic, famously declaring Ana al-Haq, which translates to "I am the truth," or effectively, "I am God." And then we have Bayezid Bistami.
Bistami's quotes are staggering. He said, "I am the wine drinker and the wine and the cupbearer. I am the throne and the footstool. I saw the Kaaba walking around me." And perhaps the most shocking to an Orthodox ear, "Your obedience to me is greater than my obedience to you."
I mean, stop right there. Your obedience to me is greater than my obedience to you. He is saying God obeys him more than he obeys God. How did these guys survive saying things like that? I know al didn't survive. He was brutally executed in Baghdad for saying, "I am the truth."
Yeah.
But my core struggle here is, how is this not just the ultimate narcissistic arrogance? The ego surviving the fire and just declaring itself God.
That is the exact tension that caused Hallaj to be executed. The Orthodox authorities heard it as the ultimate arrogance of the ego. But as comparative scholars of mysticism, we must carefully unpack the theology of Amalak. This is not the human ego claiming divinity. It is the exact terrifying opposite. It is the ultimate humility.
How is "I am God" humble?
Because the I that is speaking is no longer Mansur al-Halash. The ego has been so completely annihilated in the fire of fana, the flute has been so totally hollowed out, that there is no Mansur left to claim anything. Only God is left, speaking through the human vocal cords. It's the empty room.
So the radio is just playing the signal. The radio isn't claiming to have invented the music.
Precisely. And Schimmel uses a brilliant metaphor that appears across both Eastern and Western mysticism to explain the mechanics of this. The iron in the fire.
Walk us through that.
When a cold, dark bar of iron is placed into a roaring fire, it begins to absorb the heat and the light. Eventually, it reaches a point of total saturation where the iron becomes red hot and fiery itself. At that exact moment of ultimate saturation, if the iron could speak, it might cry out, "I am the fire."
Because it looks like fire, it burns like fire, it gives off light like fire.
Yes. But substantial union maintains a paradox. The iron is still technically iron, the fire is still fire. The iron hasn't become the element of fire, it has just taken on all the qualities of the fire through absolute proximity and submission. In Eastern Orthodoxy, this exact same concept is called theosis, or deification. When Hallaj says, "I am the truth," It is the red-hot iron speaking. It is expressing its total saturation in the divine.
Schimmel also connects this state of annihilation to Goethe's famous poem Sehnsucht, or Blessed Longing. The central image of that poem is the moth being drawn to the candle flame. The moth doesn't just circle the flame, it immolates itself. It casts itself into the fire, giving up its ego voluntarily, specifically to attain a higher life. Die and become, Goethe says.
And we see this dynamic of death and resurrection not just in poetry, but enacted physically. It is the core of the Soma, the whirling dance of the Mevlevi dervishes, the order founded by Rumi.
I was watching videos of this while prepping for the deep dive.
Yeah.
It is such a hypnotic, powerful visual. Break down the physical symbolism of the dance for us, because it looks like a funeral that turns into a solar system.
That's a highly accurate description. The dancers, the Semazin, begin by walking solemnly into the space wearing these heavy, long, black cloaks. These cloaks symbolize the perishable earthly body, the heavy ego, the tomb. They stand with their arms crossed over their chests, representing the number one, testifying to God's unity.
And then the music shifts. The reed flute starts crying.
Exactly. And as the music begins, they physically cast off these heavy black cloaks. Underneath, they are wearing radiant, flowing white gowns, which represent the spiritual body of resurrection. The ego has been shed. And then they begin to whirl. One hand is turned up to the sky to receive the divine grace, and the other hand is turned down to the earth to pass that grace onto humanity. They become the planets revolving around the sun. They become the moths dancing around the candle. The Sama is a literal kinetic enactment of Fauna and Baka dying to the heavy, dark self and coming alive as a conduit of light in the center of love.
Okay, let's take a deep breath and synthesize this map we've laid out. We are entering the final synthesis, the universal religion of the heart. We've traced this journey from the rusted mirror, through the painful demolition of the pickaxe, into the terrifying emptiness of the hollow flute. We pushed through the tavern of holy madness and finally into the absolute annihilation of the ego in the fire of love. The central question remains, what does this transformed heart look like when it puts its clothes back on and walks out into the world?
It belongs to a different religion entirely. Rumi writes, "The ocean diver doesn't need snowshoes. The love religion has no code or doctrine, only God. So the ruby has nothing engraved on it. It doesn't need markings."
That is another radical claim. The transformed heart supersedes religious dogma.
It doesn't necessarily discard the external forms. Rumi remained a practicing Muslim his entire life, but it sees through them to the underlying reality. The sources describe love as playing every conceivable role in the universe. It is no longer just an emotion, it is the fundamental physics of reality. It's a dyer turning cheeks saffron. It's a butcher killing the ego, a wet nurse feeding the soul, a fierce lion, a physician. It is the mother that gives birth to humankind.
Love's the prime mover. And the saint who's been transformed by this love doesn't necessarily float around on a cloud with a glowing halo. The texts explicitly say, a great soul hides like Muhammad or Jesus moving through a crowd in a city where no one knows him. They look entirely normal on the outside, but internally they move in an unconditioned way, even though they seem to be bound by the conditioned world.
To illustrate what that internal reality looks like, the texts give us this incredible, almost hallucinogenic vision from a wandering mystic named Dukakti. It perfectly encapsulates the dissolution of boundaries that happens in the awakened heart.
Let's end with Dukakti's vision, because it feels like the ultimate culmination of seeing the whole elephant instead of just the trunk.
So Dukakti is walking barefoot over stones and thorns, but he says he is lost inside God, so he feels no pain. He reaches the shore of an ocean at twilight. Suddenly he sees 7 candles on the beach.
And then the laws of physics just completely break down.
Completely. The 7 candles rise into the sky and merge into one blindingly bright candle. Then they fan out to 7 again. Dukakti's so overwhelmed he falls down, gets back up, and suddenly the 7 candles are 7 men. Then the men become 7 trees, so dense with leaves that no limbs are visible.
The text says, flashes of light spurted from each fruit like juice. And Dukakti sees hundreds of thousands of people passing beside these trees, sacrificing everything just to find some scrap of shade under them.
What Dakwaki is experiencing is the total breakdown of hourly time, of linear sequence, and of distinct relation. He is watching the multiplicity of the universe, the many candles, men, trees, collapse into the profound unity of God, and then expand back out into multiplicity. The boundaries of reality dissolve because his heart is no longer perceiving the world through the fragmented, categorizing lens of the intellect. He is seeing with the eye of the heart.
The paradox of love is fully realized. He says earlier in the text that the lover is like an elephant helpless in a bag. But the more you are captured by this love, the freer you become. You are finally freed from the claustrophobic prison of your own identity.
So if we synthesize this comparative map of the awakened heart across all these traditions, Sufism, Christian mysticism, Vedanta, we see astonishingly consistent experiential patterns.
Let's list them out to crystallize this for the listener. First, the acknowledgement of the limitation of the intellect. The mind cannot grasp the infinite.
Second, the painful, necessary stripping away of identity. The pickaxe, the kenosis, the emptying of the flute.
Third, the intoxicating flood of divine presence. The wine, the madness, the fire that melts the ego.
And finally, the annihilation of the subject-object divide. Fauna, theosis, the unitive state. The lover and the beloved become one mirror reflecting itself. While the theological interpretations might vary widely across cultures, the lived journey of the heart through purification, illumination, and union remains a universal human potential.
If you take away nothing else from this deep dive, realize that the goal of these traditions isn't to build a better, more moral, more successful version of yourself. The modern self-help project is ultimately a dead end. The goal is to become an empty room so the ultimate guest can enter.
It is the radical surrender of the self to the source. It is the invitation to the tavern.
I want to thank you, the listener, for taking this intense deep dive with us into the mystical heart. We covered a lot of ground today, from shattering embryos to red-hot iron. But remember that these sources, Rumi, Schimmel, Eckhart, the classical masters, they aren't just writing beautiful historical poetry for us to analyze intellectually. They are providing a practical, psychological manual for your own inner architecture today, right now.
The pickaxe is available to anyone willing to pick it up.
Exactly. So I want to leave you with a final thought, building on the text we've explored. The sources insist again and again that the heart is a mirror, and a mirror has no choice but to reflect whatever it faces. It becomes what it looks at. So as you step back into your day, look at what occupies your mind. Look at your anxieties, your scrolling habits, your resentments, your career ambitions, and your desires. If your heart is a mirror, what are you forcing it to reflect right now? And what might happen if you dared to turn it toward the emptiness?